Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, the podcast that delves into the diverse and impactful roles scientists can play beyond the lab. With me, David Mendez. Welcome to this new episode of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Today, I have the great pleasure of having back on the show Adriana Bankston and having a new guest on the show, Jamie Vernon, both from Sigma Xi. And Adriana has been on the show a few years ago, and her bio, her CV has evolved. She is now Senior Fellow in Civic Science and Public Policy with Sigma Xi, where she leads a project that examines science policy engagement at the state level and determines the skills, knowledge, and resources required by scientists to successfully influence public policy. Prior to this role, Adriana was a principal legislative analyst at the University of California Office of Federal Governmental Relations, where she served as an advocate for the university with Congress, the administration, and federal agencies. Adriana has had a number of roles leading to where she is today, and in recognition of her contributions to the field, she was named among the top 20 in 2022 advocacy practitioners by the Advocacy Association and awarded the inaugural 2022 ARIS Emerging Broader Impact Leader Award. Adriana earned her PhD in biochemistry, cell and developmental biology, so not from social sciences or from that side. She actually pretty close to what I did, and developmental biology from Emory University. Welcome again, Adriana. Jamie Vernon is Executive Director and CEO at Sigma Xi and publisher of American Scientist. From 2014 to 2017, he served as Sigma Xi's Director of Science Communications and Publications and Editor-in-Chief of American Scientist. He was also Sigma Xi's Co-Director of Operations from 2014 to 2015, and he's a molecular biologist by training, again, from the same side of of the sciences spectrum. He transitioned from research in 2011 to serve as an American Association for the Advancement of Science, which you may know by AAAS, Science and Technology Policy Fellow, and an Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education Fellow in the U.S. Department of Energy. For more than a decade, he has been an advocate for the use of science in decision-making at all levels of government, business, and in our personal lives. He holds a bachelor's in zoology from North Carolina State University, a master's in biotechnology from East Carolina University, and a PhD in cell and molecular biology from the University of Texas at Austin. Welcome, Jamie. Welcome, Adriana, to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. It's a pleasure to have you here today to talk about science policy. So the first thing that strikes me is, and I've had conversations with students about this, is people who are, let's say, in cell biology, in biochemistry, often don't imagine themselves being in policy. They think, oh, this is for people who have had a track of human sciences, humanities, and clearly it's not the case. The thing I would ask now of both of you would be to talk a little bit about that, and maybe making kind of the link to your each of your personal journeys from the bench to what you do today. Maybe starting with Jamie, who's the new guest on the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and thanks for asking that question, because I think there's a lot of grad students and postdocs out there who are pursuing science careers and haven't even contemplated other possibilities. And I think that's par for the course when you're a scientist. You're very tunnel vision focused on probably an academic position, or maybe you're thinking about a industry research position. But what I learned very early in my scientific career, I remember specifically in 2001, I was interested in stem cells, and the Bush administration made an executive order that there would no longer be development of new stem cell lines. And, I was sort of studying evolution and development, and expecting that stem cells was going to be a key therapeutic in the future. So I immediately, from that point on, recognized the intersection between science and policy and started to follow it more closely. And obviously, my master's degree, which was related to evolution and development, I also was interested in the teaching of evolution. And so the controversy about the way evolution is taught in classrooms is also a policy issue. And being a scientist, I wanted to make sure that our future scientists and students were getting the best education around evolution. So these two things really shaped my thinking throughout my graduate career and into my postdoc about the intersection of science and policy. In 2007, I started writing a blog about policy, and that sort of opened my eyes to all of the intersections of science and policy. And I went on to establish a policy organization on my campus while I was working on my doctorate at the University of Texas at Austin. I never really thought that that was going to be a career, but I felt like as a scientist, I had a unique perspective to contribute or apply my expertise in the policy arena. Time went on. I became more involved in policy, and I began to view it as a potential career path. And ultimately, early into my postdoc career, I had to make a decision because I was accepted for the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. Had to make a decision about whether or not I wanted to make that leap fully out of research and into policy. And I'll just say for those who are out there thinking about policy as a potential career, I hadn't published in my postdoc yet. So I knew that if I made the move towards policy, I probably wasn't going to be going back to the bench because, as you know, the publish or perish situation still exists. And so, that was sort of how I went through the early stage process of thinking about policy. I made the leap. I'm glad I did because it opened doors that I never expected to see. Gave me opportunities to establish myself in the policy arena, started to build a career path for myself, and then that led to my current position at Sigma Xi, but there's a lot of steps along the way there as well. But it was a great decision for me, and I think you have to sort of dabble in it in order to get an idea of whether or not it's right for you. And then make that commitment once you're ready.
It's super interesting something you mentioned because Adriana, who has been on the show, mentioned something similar, which is you organized as a graduate student some sort of group event or seminars. I don't know what form it took exactly around science policy. And Adriana, it was the same with you, right? Can you maybe do the parallel with that and talk a little bit about your journey so far?
Sure. Yeah. So, my interest in policy, as we've talked about that on here before, has come from being in academia and trying to influence universities to support the STEM pipeline, whether that means, paying postdocs better or treating students well and thinking about mentoring and career development and mental health and all these things. So really thinking about the research environment that scientists need to be successful in research. That really was sort of general interest that I turned into my career eventually. So working on, advocating for postdoc salaries in response to a federal labor law. This was 2016, I think, which was really a passion project. And it developed into this idea of how we could help trainees sort of from the federal level and how policymaking could influence what's happening in academia, essentially, and that intersection. And this became, I had advocated for trainees and sort of their success in science before I actually worked in advocacy. And so I transitioned through a number of societies and nonprofits, eventually into a fellowship with Society for Neuroscience, where, again, we advocated for research funding and training. As you mentioned in the intro, worked with the University of California, very similar sort of, advocacy for funding for federal research and supporting the STEM pipeline. But of course, that was more related to researchers in the UC system. But overall, again, the same sort of trend of supporting researchers who wanted to engage in policy and coming to DC to talk about their work on the Hill and with agencies. And now with the work with Sigma Xi and other things I'm doing, it's more related to how we can really connect scientists to the policy space. Maybe not as directly, but or not directly in advocacy, but trying to create pathways for them to engage through a number of different roles.
Excellent. That was actually going to be my next question. So both of you are now working together at Sigma Xi. We've mentioned Sigma Xi in the beginning. Before I have a question coming up, but before that, does one of you want to share what Sigma Xi is, what the mission is?
Sure, I'll talk about that. So Sigma Xi is the Scientific Research Honor Society. It's basically the honor society for scientists and engineers. We have members all over the country and around the world in chapters at universities, academic chapters, but also industry and government chapters. And so we have an interest in the policies representing the interests of the scientists in all of those different arenas and the policies that affect them. So many of our members come to us earlier in their careers, but we have a variety of programs that serve throughout their careers. We're also an organization that largely connects across disciplines. We're a multidisciplinary organization, so all branches of science, all fields of science, and all levels of science. So many of our senior members tend to give back to the next generation of scientists through mentorship and that sort of thing. We just had our annual conference, the International Forum on Research Excellence. So we have an emphasis within the organization on ethics and integrity and how research is conducted. So, but broadening that definition from what historically or traditionally has been viewed as your number of publications or your grants or the institute at which you work as being a defining of your excellence. The reality is today, I think that the public expects more from science. And so broadening the definition of excellence includes who does the science? Is it inclusive? Is it collaborative? Does it serve the interests of the public? Are we taking into consideration the needs of society as we do this work that we do? So Sigma Xi's, I would say our mission is sort of evolving in a modern culture.
Mm-hmm. And now, so my follow-up to that, so clearly the members are researchers. Not everyone has to leave the bench to, dedicate themselves to advocacy and policy. But it feels to me like you can be in research and leverage your knowledge, your passion for these issues, and bring some results back to your institute, to your research, to your lab. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of how Sigma Xi can promote this?
So actually, that's the heart of the project that Adriana has been working on. And we started with a civic science fellow, Andrew George, developing the concept for a platform that allows scientists of all different disciplines and all different career stages to engage in policy. And one of the things that we really wanted to emphasize is that scientists can contribute to policy in a variety of roles. And many of the opportunities that are discussed out there when you're first being introduced to policy are fellowships and these things that require you to leave research behind in many ways and go full time into policy. But the reality is scientists don't want to necessarily leave the bench. They want their expertise to be incorporated into evidence-based policymaking. And so we're trying to identify opportunities for scientists to lend their expertise to the policy process without having to be fully involved, and also not to be limited to advocacy only. There's a lot of advisory roles and support that can be provided to legislators that isn't in an advocacy capacity. And so, maybe Adriana can talk a little bit about the work she's been doing to identify all those different types of policy opportunities and what we're doing to make those accessible to scientists.
Yeah, so let me give you some background on the platform. So it's called Civico, and we aim to connect scientists to policy opportunities at the state level at this point. And then, we want to think about how they can take advantage of these opportunities to take action in policy or learn about policy or influence it in some way. Currently, I would say that state level policymaking is a growing field, and so what we have in the platform are, as Jamie said, fellowships, but also internships, boot camps, and other kinds of trainings, sort of a one-stop shop for this, because there's a lot of interest in the field, but no one's really collated everything sort of in one place to just be able to go and search through things you can get involved in. We also have case studies of individuals that use these opportunities to transition into various careers and different roles. That can be advocacy, can be government roles, it can be advisors, things like advisory boards, and getting involved in some of these things that don't require leaving the bench, right? So there's, I would say, of course, nowadays there's many more opportunities than there were even when I started, but things like science policy groups and opportunities on your campus to get involved with, or nonprofits or societies that work on some of the issues that you're interested in. All of those kinds of things are in the platform, and maybe hopefully will give you some ideas of different ways you can engage.
Excellent. And so you've told kind of very quickly, I myself and you complemented a little bit the story of your journeys, of your academic and then professional journeys. And one thing I've learned in these, just a little bit over 4 years of podcasts and of talking with people who did their PhDs and then did something else, is that the path is not linear. It's sometimes it's happenstance, sometimes it's there's serendipity in there. There's some chaos. And looking back, people are able to make sense of it, but it feels like this platform may help people actually have kind of a leg up and start towards this adding this policy branch to their journey in a more straightforward way. I wonder if you have a comment on that, on the linearity or absence of it once you leave the bench and decide to do something else.
As I mentioned, I mean, for me, the sort of side project that I was working on, this postdoc salaries, turned into my career, right? So that's something that can happen. You have a project that you're really interested in, and that can translate. So I think that's in some ways good advice. Finding a policy area that you're interested in, passionate about, and sort of following that to see where it can lead you, because there's a lot of opportunities at different sectors you can work in. And for me, it was very exploratory in some way, because that's really one area I was interested in, but also wanted to see what other options were out there. I got involved with a number of scientific societies and policy committees and nonprofits, trying to see where policy was happening and the different settings, and eventually ended up doing advocacy. But that's really because I wanted to try and push certain things on Capitol Hill that I was already working on before. So I think what you said makes sense, and that's right. There's some luck involved in it, kind of right place, right time. But that would be, I think, kind of my general advice, is finding something that you're interested in, kind of following that. And the platform certainly facilitates that in some of the disciplines that we have there. But having a policy area of interest can kind of drive your path too.
And for people who might be interested or curious, or who might actually be a little bit doubtful of exactly what policy means, what effect it can have on their research, who they can interact with, it could be the federal level, it could be state level. Can you popularize a little bit of that for people who might not be so much in the know about the space, about the culture?
Yeah, I want to I wanted Adriana to speak on that last point because I think she's had an interesting career and she's at a point now where she's continuing to build the networks and the relationships and find those opportunities, which are numerous and varied. And it really comes down to building the relationships that lead to your next opportunity in policy. And at some point, you become settled. And I would say to some degree, I've settled into my position. It's hard for me to have a lot of movement at this level. But the path to get here was definitely nonlinear. And to address your question, first figuring out what the ecosystem looks like. What's the landscape of policy? And to be honest, the AAAS fellowship is like the fastest track to really getting integrated into policy. But there are many, many fellowships now. There's lots of fellowships at the state level. There's also more federal level policy fellowships. And so you really need to take a look at all of those. Most of the disciplines have one of the scientific societies that offers a policy fellowship. And then once you get into those positions, you start to see what the opportunities are and how you can apply your scientific training. I think that the strength of the AAAS fellowship is that it's specifically intended to take advantage of your scientific background and bring those analytical skills and that discipline specific knowledge to some area. Now, I made an interesting leap. Being a biologist, I chose to work on what I considered to be the greatest threat to humanity, which is climate change. And so I didn't go to the NIH and take something that was very closely related to my scientific training. I went to DOE and worked with mostly physicist fellows. So most of the people that worked around me were from physics, and they were incredibly intelligent, and they were working on these problems, very complex problems. And I found my path in policy, and it wasn't what I expected. Doing strategic policy analysis and developing strategic plans and developing the data that informs investments in renewable energy technologies. Those are things you don't ever envision as a molecular biologist doing. But those experiences introduced me to the many different facets of policy and how the executive branch, where I was working, interacted with the legislative branch and even the White House. And so you have to get in and sort of investigate and tinker around and figure out where you fit and where you can apply your skills, and keep your eyes open for opportunities, especially in the early days, because those small opportunities might turn into huge opportunities. And that's really my story. The way that I arrived at Sigma Xi is a small opportunity turning into a huge one.
Excellent. And a curiosity that I have is, once you are in these types of settings, in these types of conversations, these types of projects, who are the types of stakeholders that you're having conversations with, that you're sitting at the table with, who that are usually not in the normal universe of a scholar, of a researcher?
Mm-hmm. Well, would you ever imagine yourself sitting with the Secretary of Energy or a governor of a state, or those are definitely opportunities that you'll get. Having a PhD, I think, inserts you in the federal government at a level that gives you much more access. And so I would say, if you're a grad student, get that PhD even if you want to go into policy, and then and leverage that, because it opens doors for you. But yeah, there were many situations, and I did spend time at the White House. I didn't necessarily work with President Obama during my time, but I did work with John Holdren, who was the advisor to the president, and some of his staff brought me in to work on science communications around climate change, because I had a fair amount of experience in science communication at that point. And so you can't always anticipate that you're going to be in those high-level situations, but they do happen. And then at the state level, actually, I think you can get pretty high within the government pretty quickly if you choose the right opportunities, because even there's more interest in hearing from scientists at the state level. many times.
Excellent. And from what I read, Civico kind of wants to be a bridge, because these are two spaces that are maybe contiguous sometimes, but they're not, they're not naturally close. And it feels like Civico is going to be a bridge to make it easier for communication to happen one way and that way and back. Is this Adriana? Do you have a comment on this?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of two ways to look at this. One is, as I already said, that there really isn't one place where all these opportunities have been collated. And so that's one of the things we wanted to do is centralize state level opportunities. I think it'll grow beyond that into one place where you can search through different things depending on where you live and different filters and all of that. But also we talked about sort of the other side, right, where policymakers and their staff and folks in government are looking for scientific expertise, which is increasingly happening, and nice to see that. So the idea that we connect scientists with policy opportunities, but also policymakers who are interested in scientific expertise for a number of things, and there are different projects, and certainly that's been seen. When I was at University of California, for example, we would have experts work in, talk to Congress about specific topics, testify, or even just serve as an advisor for specific things that they were trying to develop. So that's something else to consider is where your expertise is helpful in these different settings where policymakers are looking for the expertise that you have and something you can share with them.
And do you have an example, for people who are listening or watching, an example of one of these subjects, these questions or these issues where government needs scientists to chime in? Do you have examples?
Yeah, so I think some of the best ones are folks who have transitioned and, for example, like the CCST fellowship, right? They've done a state fellowship and work in California government. That's one of the best ones that is well known as far as state level opportunities. From my career, we worked on a lot on, for example, wildfires, and this is something that is growing, I think, at the federal level too. But we've often had folks who, they did roundtables on wildfires to inform some future, responses or just legislative language. Or reports or things that would be used by agencies, for example, by NIH or by Congress in a number of settings. So definitely have seen policymakers reaching out to scientists for different expertise.
Now, you had mentioned to me this idea of a speakers bureau, and it feels like it connects with what you were just talking now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this relates to, right now we are launching a pilot version of Civico. So we have our launch event on Monday. But and it's currently geared towards scientists who want to engage in policymaking. But like I said, there's increasingly interest from policymakers and staff to look for this scientific expertise. And so, from the platform, we'll have scientists who have profiles in there that a staff person can find who is in a specific policy area or a specific state, right? So there's different ways to filter through policy fields, which state you're in, what kind of branch of government. And then I think it's really valuable and nice to see sort of an increased interest from policymakers in scientific expertise. And so I think it'll become a valuable platform for them to search through this database of scientists and be able to reach out to them for different purposes.
And thinking about the ecosystem, the academic ecosystem, there's PIs, there's postdocs, there's graduate students. Can anyone who is a young researcher or PhD to be, who has this interest to maybe have something to say on the policy side, go onto the platform, explore, and participate?
Yes, absolutely. It's free, open. You just have to create an account to be able to see all the opportunities. So we have a few things that are sort of public facing, but really the bulk of the information is behind the login because we want you to be able to see all the content that we have in there and connect with folks who are in the platform, and also the folks who are represented as the case studies as well. So yeah, please join and sign up. Yeah, the website is up right now, so it's Go Civico. And we launched it sort of informally a few days ago and presented on it at the I4 conference. So we've had a good number of folks sign up, but this is going to be a virtual event. We'll have speakers from staff and advisory board, and of course, doing a deep dive sort of demonstration of the platform on November 20th at noon. So that's something, if you're interested, you can sign up.
It's important to know really the origin of Civico because it came out of state level science policy fellowship. So the North Carolina State STEM postgraduate fellowship is working with Sigma Xi to develop the training for the fellows before they go into the state government. So we started created a online sort of virtual seminar series that talked about opportunities in state policy. And then that transitioned to a 4-day in-person boot camp where we're actually bringing in the fellows, but then we open that up to all scientists to be a part of it. And it is that boot camp where we realized that just exposing scientists to all the different types of opportunities in the state government needed a platform. And then that expanded to what Adriana has really been building, which is something that can be propagated to any state and even incorporating federal opportunities. So young scientists, senior scientists, anyone can come to the platform, get a little bit of education about policy process, and then choose a pathway. We really designed the platform around choosing a pathway. Where do you see yourself in science policy? Do you want to leverage your research background to identify policy opportunities? Or do you want to be involved in the formulation of policy, whether it's in the legislative or executive branch? Or do you want to be in the implementation and evaluation of policy? Usually that's done in the executive branch. So just breaking policy down into those three areas is a starting point for educating yourself about policy. And then diving in a little deeper into each of those three areas, you can really gain some insights and where you want to be.
And Jamie, so you talked about your journey and how, as a graduate student, you had this interest and you started investing some time in it. And one of the preoccupations I get from students often is, I'd love to be implicated in something, but how do I manage my time to do it? Do you have some insight on that, and maybe a kind of a game plan to maybe slowly taper into something more involved, but while staying in a healthy relationship with your research as a graduate student?
Yes. Well, fortunately, culture is changing a little in academia, but I would say during my time, it was highly frowned upon for you to do anything other than research. And I think, unfortunately, that's still the case for many grad students and postdocs out there, that if they're perceived as being distracted at all, then they're not serious about their research careers. But I really hope that the definition of a scientist and what this emerging movement that we're now calling civic science, which is really being advanced heavily by the Rita Allen Foundation, who is coordinating a lot of the thinking around civic science. And I have to thank Elizabeth Christopherson for her leadership in that. But we're changing the culture of science to be more civically inclined, and therefore scientists should be given some coverage or some support for doing things outside the lab that connect science to society. And so, the challenge is that the expectations of a grad student are high, and you have to deliver on your research. So you have to, first of all, make sure you've got that under control. If you are advancing and contributing and progressing the way you need to in grad school, then maybe you can find a little bit of time on the side to dive into some of these side interests, whether it's science communication or science policy. I literally had to sort of sneak around in some ways on campus. But then once my group reached a certain level and we were written up in the school newspaper, there was no hiding what I was doing. But at that point, I think I'd established myself enough, and as a scientist and as someone who was trying to advance policy, that it became somewhat accepted, and people knew that that was something I was interested in working on. So I can't say your advisor is going to be the best partner in this, but maybe as you're going into it, find an advisor who's open to you doing things outside the lab, and then pursuing those opportunities.
That's great advice. And Adriana, on your side, because you also started something when you were in graduate school, do you have a comment on this aspect?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's really important for scientists, even if you're just starting out in graduate school, to think about the societal impact of your research. And I've heard more of this recently, that a few universities that are doing have sort of policy or sort of societal, chapters in their dissertation that relate to the societal relevance or policy impact. That's the sort of thing you should think about that anyway, even if you're not writing it. But I would include that in your dissertation. So that's potentially one way to sell this, because when I started, I organized some trainings and career development workshops and a symposium, which my advisor actually attended. So that's one way to get the buy-in that, you can build something that your university will find useful. And also, I think eventually it became something that they embraced because they could see the value for their faculty and their postdocs who were involved too. But one thing is, I think, I guess when I started, it wasn't, similarly to Jamie, it wasn't very obvious what I was doing. I was started writing about issues related to women in science and why we need to diversify the pipeline while I was running, my Western blots, and like, well, I have to wait for 2 hours, might as well do something else. And so that's how it started, right? And then it became accepted in some ways because the university benefited from it in some fashion. But my advisor was pretty receptive of some of those activities too.
Excellent. Now I'm going to bring us up like this again. Because now I'm thinking we're getting to the end of I think we've covered most that I had thought of. If I missed something, or if there's something that you'd like to bring up, we have the date of the launch, November 20th at noon. There's a link going down here. Actually, I'm gonna make it clearer, but there's a link down here to register. GoCivico.com is the site that is already live. Is there some aspect that we didn't cover? Is there some call to action that you wanna give to the audience? It's the moment to do that.
Well, I would say that we just had Frances Arnold, who's Nobel laureate, at Sigma Xi's International Forum on Research Excellence. And, this is a Nobel laureate scientist, and she's at Caltech, but she travels, I think, bi-weekly, so every couple of weeks, back to Washington, D.C. to participate in the President's Council on Science and Technology. So she's an advisor to the federal government while she's also a premier scientist. And I think that says a lot about the importance of having scientists who are prepared to serve in those roles. And if you have done nothing but science, it'd be very difficult at that stage of your career to understand the connections between your research and society. And so I think as a culture of science, we should be shifting in a direction where at the earliest stages, scientists are given opportunities to understand those connections and to choose a pathway that serves their interests in making those connections. And what I mean is, I initially started out as a science communicator, using social media to communicate science. And that sort of led me to policy because I was drawn to the intersection of science communication and policy. How does science communication advance policy? And then that ultimately led me into positions in policy where that were tremendously rewarding. So I think that everyone should be thinking about how to get the experience to be prepared when their research is in need of a policy solution. And that's an interesting thing, is you may feel that your research does not have policy implications, but probably coronavirus virologists didn't anticipate COVID and the role that their research would play in development of policy either. So we should all have at least some basic understanding, and we should be pursuing those goals.
Adriana, do you have something to add?
Yeah, so I think just somewhat to parallel what Jamie said, I think as an early career scientist, there's lots of ways to get involved and explore the field while you're still doing research. Get involved with your local science policy group. If it doesn't exist, create one. That's good leadership experience. Get involved with your scientific society, and a lot of societies nowadays have different types of programs and opportunities for policy. This is one of the things, I always say this on podcasts, that just because your early career doesn't mean you don't have something to offer that policymakers are going to listen to you. And in fact, from my experience, they really like to hear from students, and their perspectives and research and what they're going through has influenced programs in the executive branch, legislative language, and things where early career issues and pipeline issues were interesting, and they wanted to highlight that more. So don't be afraid to get involved where you are. And then if you're interested in transitioning full-time, again, there's a lot of fellowships and opportunities. I think in some ways you kind of learn on the job how the system works, but these fellowships can be helpful for transitioning, and certainly a lot of them will be in Civico too. So check it out.
Yeah. David, I wanted to add on to that point that Adriana made about being a certain stage of your career and contributing. That's absolutely true, that no matter where you are, if you are inclined towards science, you have a voice that can be used, and there are policymakers who are interested. I would say that also there's almost a limit in the impact that you might anticipate. There may be doors that won't open unless you have certain types of experience. And so you want to practice humility as you're going into policy. I think across the board, we often think that science is the answer. And when you bring science into the policy process, we have to come with humility, because science is ultimately weighed in a series of values decisions that have to be made. And the best thing that we can do is have science at the table and ready to answer a question, but not always expect or force science to drive the decisions that are made. I think that we often, too often, push science over other values, and that's not how policy is made.
It feels to me like it's you need to go in. Often on the show, I hear someone say PhDs are ultra learners, and I think it go in. What you're saying and how I'm interpreting it is, go in as someone who's going to learn something new and bring another palette of colors to the discussion, but not going to be the smartest person in the room. And it's funny because in other contexts we talk a lot about careers on the show. It's something that's come back again and again, how this attitude can hinder you in whichever discussion between be it a job interview or, like you said, entering this new space where now the system is much more complex, and science is just one part of what's having an impact on decisions. It's super interesting. The project sounds to me very sound, very exciting. I think also because as of late, you mentioned COVID. As of late, research and science has been, I wouldn't say under attack, but under critique, or in this sort of a crisis of of public opinion around it. And having the people who do it at the table, I think, is very important. And it feels to me like what Sigma Xi is doing with Civico is really a one-stop shop for people to be able to cross that bridge easily and be part of those discussions in a way that's much simpler that they might have thought of just being in their lab and thinking, I wish I could do something about this. Well, now there's a place where they can go and actually kind of have a jump start to that side of things. It feels really inspiring, and really commend you for the project, and for thinking of bringing in the research community like that. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, I often say that we have this hypothesis. I call it a hypothesis that more science is going to lead to better policy outcomes. And we really won't know that until we've brought to bear the full interest and focus of the scientific enterprise. And I think when people view barriers to policy, then we're not enabling them to have the impact they potentially could on policy. And that's what Civico is designed to address, is lowering that barrier for folks who want to engage in policy to be able to do so.
Excellent. There's a big challenge in bringing people who are in research into these domains who are less directly connected to their lab, to their research subject. And it's really important to have these conversations and to show that, no, you have a place here. Actually, you are wanted by the community that is not in research, because they need you, they need your knowledge, they need your know-how, and I think it's really important to kind of make it clear that it's not menacing. It's not just for people who have, I don't know, years of experience in diplomacy or politics, etc. You, as a young researcher, as a young scientist, can contribute to the conversation and actually lead to outcomes that you can see in your, and that we had seen this when I had talked with Adriana. You can see results of these efforts in a time frame that's often they can be shorter than what you do in research, which often it takes a long time to get results.
That's a great point, because I think there are people who are motivated by immediate gratification, and policy is a way to have a little bit of that. I mean, you have as many failures in policy as you do in science, but the accomplishments potentially affect a lot of people. I mean, Adriana had a nice addition to the recent Chips and Science Act that's going to potentially affect the scientific workforce, and that it will forever be an impact she has on the scientific community. And policy is very rewarding in that way, and it's worth it when you can have that type of success. But you mentioned something, we didn't touch on this as much as we probably should have, which is one of the things that I really wanted Civico to accomplish was not only to identify the opportunities, but to connect a training with the opportunity, so that whatever that opportunity is, you can learn how to do it well. A scientist may not feel prepared to sit on an advisory commission in the state or federal government. And so where can you go to learn about that particular type of policy engagement? Or where do you go to serve as a witness in a hearing? These types of things, those trainings are out there, but you don't always have someone to connect you to that training when you identify the opportunity. And so we hope to accomplish that as well.
Adriana, Jamie, this was really very inspiring. It was great. The potential, I see it's there. I hope the launch is a great success. and that you can bring these burgeoning policy makers or contributors to the table who might be not hiding, but maybe afraid or fearful of stepping up, that you can bring them to the limelight and having them take part in these conversations. So the launch again, November 20th at noon. I will share the link. I have a shortened link here, which is hard to say live, but I will share it in the show notes of the episode. And yeah, I'm going to be waiting for updates on the project because this sounds really, really, really cool. Thank you for having taken the time to be here today and to talk about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another Beyond the Thesis conversation with me, David Mendez, and my guests, Adriana Bankston and Jamie Vernon. If you found any value in this conversation, please share it with someone like you and help Beyond the Thesis reach as many ears as possible. And if you want to help a little bit more, please go to papaphd.com/audience and fill in the survey that is there for you, and leave a comment so I can give you a shout out in a future episode. Thank you for being a fan, happy listening, and happy sharing.